Good afternoon. My name is Gene Swallow. I am a cultural mentor for the Title VI Indian Education Department of the Rapid City Area School System. I'm currently working in North Middle School this year, and the classroom behind me is called the Eagle's Nest. And the Eagle's Nest is really a nice place where our younger relatives can come in to catch up on some homework, take a breather, um, create a plan to get through the rest of their day and just get off to a second chance to their day. So I really value these students, and we have a lot of fun, and I've met some really valuable souls. So I really appreciate my time here, and I've never been in a school that had this environment, and I just think it's such a great place. So if any of my students are watching, I'm really happy that we get to work together, and I hope that you can learn something today about ledger art. And that brings me to the purpose of this video, is to discuss some ledger art and the beginnings and what you can do to reproduce some of it. Ledger art is an art form that came out of necessity when as the Eastern encroachment of settlers came in, our people kind of were running out of spaces to live, and we were accommodating and fighting for our lands and our way of life. And finally, our ancestors were imprisoned onto reservations where life as they knew it ceased to exist. So when we have a culture that thrived on hunting and gathering and the value of the buffalo in particular, it's really kind of a sad part of our history, but through it and through resourcefulness, it became a turnaround with the availability of creating ledger art. So stories and historical records and just pieces of art were kept on natural materials, most of it being hides. And when the Native Americans lost that resource being on the reservation, they turned to finding discarded ledger paper and maps and so on that had no use in the white world. Well, that became an opportunity to create a piece of art. So a lot of those storytelling elements or historical record-keeping elements ended up being on ledger paper, and it created an aesthetic that ended up being really desirable. And today, we're lucky to live in an area where we can go into a local business or a bank and find these really valuable pieces of art that are historical. And then nowadays, contemporary artists are really taking advantage of the medium and doing really interesting things. So out of kind of a dark beginning, there seems to be some really beautiful and valuable things coming out of it. So coming up today, I'm going to show you some pre-recorded video I took. You'll see me creating a couple of pieces, 3 pieces of work that are very accessible for a beginner. And I showed this example of it because we all have different levels of artistic ability and interests. So if we see the very basic, then obviously if you're more advanced, you can do something a little more complicated. But if you're following step by step, then you would have opportunity to create something that's really nice and hopefully foolproof. So one thing I want you to keep in mind is that this is new to us, so we're not going to be very hard on ourselves. The materials that I included are basically copies of ledgers, so you don't have to really worry about whether or not you're going to ruin it, because there are ways of obtaining those things to put artwork on. Another thing is focus on storytelling or preserving a memory or a record or even a dream. So a lot of artists end up doing books, being associated with illustrations, whether it's their own or working collaboratively with an author. So keep that in mind, because there's definitely opportunities in art as a business, as a career, also, obviously as a hobby or an interest. But I just want to start a thought process where there's no limit. So as you get better, as you practice, you can reach out and find more quality materials and spend more time on it and use different techniques from different mediums. We're starting pretty easy with copies of maps and ledgers and colored pencils, but there's definitely different mediums that you can use on there, and I hope this is a good starting place. And even if it's just an activity that you want to learn one time and walk away, it doesn't matter. It's still interesting and still fun. So I hope we all can attach some sort of value to it. So to get started, we're going to go through the supply list. Then I'm going to go through and do a little voiceover on the 3 examples of types of ledger pieces that you can do. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can certainly leave any questions or comments. I'll go back through, read them, and answer them. Also on the YouTube broadcast, you can leave questions on that as well. So we'll get started, and good luck, everyone. I hope you have fun. So before we get started, I want to go over a few things that are in your kit if you had registered for the class. If you don't have, if you didn't register for the class and you don't have the kit, don't worry. I'm going to show you what we're using and what you can use. And it's all about resourcefulness. So we'll think of ways to get something to you or something you can use in place. One of the first things I have in the kit for ledger paper is actually a map of the Black Hills. And this is just a little tourist map that you can get at restaurants and truck stops, and they're in this big notepad and you peel them. I did go to a website and download this, however, and reprint it for you. Another thing I added was a map of South Dakota, and ledger art is done on various pieces of paper, so maps certainly do work if you don't have ledger paper available to you. Older documents. So I did this, and I printed this one because I liked the yellowishness of it, and it made it seem like it was really old, so it'll give our piece a really good look. Another background I gave you is this copy of a census record, and this is something I just did a Google search, found it, I downloaded it. I ended up putting like a little yellow tinge to it so it looks like it's aged, and this will be something you would use right on top. Another thing included is just this piece of ruled tablet paper, and this doesn't show very well in this light, but this is very reminiscent of some of the examples we showed. Always look at the background and see what is on there. So this would be something in your kit that you can use. I also have this miniature piece of ledger paper. So this isn't authentic. This isn't anything that's antique or really anything of value, but it is pretty representative of paper that would have been used to keep dates, times, names, whatever was on this. You can use it for one side, and really there's no rules of how you use it. You could use it the long way. There's a back side if you need to practice. And that was just kind of a lucky find because I found this book in a secondhand store. So a lot of the times if you go to Pack Rat Palace or the Salvation Army, in some of the office supply areas, you'll see little ledger keeping books, and these are used by more modern businesses for those purposes, but you can do it with the look. Now, when you notice professional artists and the ledger paper they use, they prefer something with a history on it. So if we were to pretend that we found this and it was aged, many years, it would have more value to it if it had been filled out in that era that it was used. But for learning purposes and practice purposes, finding a book like this would be really beneficial, and you can just use it kind of as a notepad or a sketch pad. Another option would be to use just regular notebook paper, because we've all drawn pictures, we've all doodled a little bit in our notebooks, and unintentionally we've become aspiring ledger artists. So if you don't have that, you can still pull out a piece of composition paper or a lined ruled paper and have something on there that is interesting looking as well. So don't let the lack of paper, if you didn't register for the class, stop you. Even if you just pick up anything to get started, because the nice thing about this class is that there's plenty of opportunity to stop, pause, and rewind, because I cover a lot of ground and I really didn't want to end up with like a 2-hour video, even though I could probably talk that long. Another thing is you would have some colored pencil and some sort of black pen into your kit. So colored pencil is pretty self-explanatory. The black pen, this is a felt tip pen and it works really well. But even if you had like a ballpoint pen that you find in your mom and dad's drawer or something, would work, and that would just basically be to work on some outlines. One thing in our first example that I didn't include was a template for a buffalo. And so my first example is going to be a project that I do with kindergarten and first grade students, just because based on your ability, we can work that up and down to your level. But if you're not good at drawing a buffalo, you can certainly print it and cut it out, hold it and trace it, and you'll see that more coming in the video. So really quick, I wanted to run through some artists that are local to the Rapid City area. The first is Donald Montello. He is a prolific artist and known for his ledger work. We are really blessed to have some of these originals hanging in our library at North Middle School, and it's just a treat to kind of take a moment and get lost in there and see what kind of story he's telling, what kind of history he's documenting in these pieces. Very, very lucky, very blown away that these are accessible to our students to look at every day. And another interesting thing about him is that he's a well-known author, retelling some creation stories. Tatanka in particular is a book that I refer to a lot in a lot of different lessons. The next artist is Dwayne Wilcox. Dwayne is a very funny guy in person, and he has these very interesting modern yet traditional works on ledger paper, and they're just so interesting, and I don't even know if I could do justice trying to describe them, but they just mean a lot to me, and they're very deep. Dwayne is also an author. He'll have a book out in May of next year, so that's definitely going into my collection. The next artist is Wade Patton. Wade does a lot of work with clouds and buffalo and teepee, a lot of symbolism. His work is very pretty, and I wish I had a better word for that, but I just see pretty every time I see his work, and I'm always impressed that he can keep the same themes but have things be very, very different. Wade also has work done in a book doing the illustrations for the Native American ABC. Okay, so we're going to start out with the map of South Dakota. You can use any background you want, but I wanted to show this example of pretty much the easiest picture that we could do in ledger art, especially as a young learner. This is a project I'll do with students clear as young as first grade or kindergarten, and usually we get with a partner. I have a stencil to trace. I have one student hold the stencil while another traces, and then we take a brown crayon or pencil like we have in our kit, and then we proceed to fill in the entire buffalo. This takes a little practice, takes a little motivation, but at this point, everyone's pretty eager. So what I'll go ahead and do is fill in the entire space of the tracing. Now, with older students, and if you're in middle school or high school watching this, you can certainly pick any animal. I do the buffalo because it's easy to trace a template, and I keep it really simple for our younger artists. But since we are in the area of the Oceti Sakowin and we're using a map of South Dakota, I don't necessarily want to see any camels or crocodiles or anything like that. So feel free to choose any creature from our natural resources, which can be deer, elk, mountain lions, ducks, badgers. It's wide open into fish or snakes, and a lot of students choose insects. Dragonflies are pretty popular. And I did have a student that was being particularly challenging and says, well, what if I want to do a dinosaur? And that's certainly an option, because in our area we do have fossils, and we did have dinosaurs, and in Lakota culture it has stories of dinosaurs too. So we end up getting this really nice shape, and the next thing you'll do is take the black pen that's in your kit and create the outline. And this basically just makes the drawing stand out a little bit. And this is another thing that our younger artists can do. And a lot of the times when I do an example for younger artists, I'll intentionally make a mistake, and I'll tell them that I'm okay with it and that I'm trying my best. And I really want you guys to enjoy this and really know that this much of it is practice. So go easy on yourself. And once you learn a process, you can always redo it. So that's the nice thing. So we added the outline, and really there's only 3 or 4 elements that we add. We do the horn, the eye, the hoof, and I kind of sort of did a nostril, and it's not perfect, but I'm definitely okay with it. I think it looks like a buffalo. I usually take green and just do like the impression of a surface. So I'll just add a little grass to show that he's standing. But if you definitely want to put him standing on a hill, or whatever you want him to be on, you can do that. The background is fair game. So a lot of people like to add elements of the sky, like the sun and the cloud, or even add a bird. This becomes your choice at this point. I always make sure there's grass and sunshine just to give him a little spatial awareness. The last thing I'll touch on too is we can do borders just for the sake of having something visually appealing, and if you want to add different colors. In this case, I just did circles. Students are advised to pick shapes that they like or symbols. Lakota stars are pretty popular. And here we have a basic picture. So the only other touch I'm adding here is buffaloes have almost two tones in color and in texture of their hide. So I went ahead and just added a layer of brown. I just used the same exact brown, just pressing a little darker, and it just kind of gives him another tone. If you're picky, you can fill in like the little white spaces that you missed. And another thing I always say is artist always signs their picture. So I just put my signature in the corner. Our next project here is kind of a botanical sketch of sorts of the Timsila. And Timsila, of course, are very important food source for Lakota. I used the Black Hills, a local area map on this one. And in this case, previously we had a template to trace with the buffalo. In this case, I just used my resources and looked up a photograph of a Timsila plant, and based off of just memory of seeing it and the physical reference of a plant, I came up with this sketch. So that's another thing I want you to be aware of, is that we have, a lot of us have phones in our hands at any given time. So use that as a resource to look things up visually, especially photographs, and if you're going to transcribe something into a picture. So like the buffalo picture previously, I did the outline in pencil, and then I'm taking my colored pencil and filling in the details. And you might see I'm leaving some white spaces in the coloring, and that's just because I don't want to put too much into having things perfect on these examples, because first of all, I'm not an expert in creating ledger art myself, so this is something that I'm still learning with, and since I'm doing this picture visually, I just want to go easy on myself. So the first thing I did was add the actual turnip portion of the Timsila. I added the foliage, and then I'm adding these purple leaf-like bell shapes that are the flower of the plant. And so if you were to look at a photograph of the top of a Timsila, obviously this isn't photographic, so I'm taking my best shot and doing my best interpretation. And I think when you do something like this and you're not sure, just trust your intentions, and I think that you'll be good to go on that point. So here we have everything colored in, and then I'm taking the black pen, and in this case I'm using a Sharpie. You have a pen in your kit, and that'll work fine. I noticed when I did the practice run with a pen, it wasn't showing up on the camera with the lighting, so that's why I used a darker Sharpie for the line. And then once you trace the outline of your picture, you can add like the little crease of the leaf, the little details in the flower. And then again, I'm not sure how many botanical sketches I've seen in ledger art, but it's a local resource. It's something available to us, part of our history. So I think the adaptation could be made. We do have other important plants in our lives, so certainly if you wanted to do sage, we have spruce in the Black Hills, we have some cottonwood trees. Yucca is really important. We used it for soap. Everything in here in our area had a use of some sorts, whether it was medicinal or nourishment. And a local resource would be Lisa Ironclad. She knows everything. I'm not even going to attempt to explain what she knows, but look her up. For our final example today, we're going to use the copy of the census ledger that I found and had printed for your kit. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to draw a person. Here we have some Lakota phrases and some examples for people if you're not confident with drawing people. And I know that was a quick show of that. I have the video sped up so we don't have a 3-hour video, which I could talk about ideas all day. But we're going to work in the form of a self-portrait or a portrait of somebody we know. If you're not confident with drawing bodies, I usually find students can draw clothing and then add to it. Like here we see I drew the shirt and then I added the arms on it and we have the top half of the body. I don't really focus on being too perfect because we're still learning, and as we refine our style and as we decide how we're going to draw people, those things usually develop a personality of their own. So just be confident with what you're doing. I have the body mapped out. Now I'm going to color in for the clothes. I have a little belt here. If you notice, my head's a little crooked. My hands don't match each other. Perfectly fine. Now, I mentioned this being a self-portrait. And if you noticed in the introduction, I don't have much hair. So this actually isn't necessarily me, but I think self-portraits are important because that's hitting one of the major art standards. And I think when you're learning art, learning how to do things in several mediums is really important. So I got his hair done. I am adding some brown for color. I think your kit has a little tan if you're not so dark, but otherwise just be okay with it. This time we're working on the neck, filling in areas where I see skin. So by now you can see there's several different options of subject matter you can do with ledger art. And when you think about it, it basically just comes down to either storytelling or documentation, whereas we're telling more of a story when we have a person, and once we get his surroundings or maybe who's beside him, you can kind of commemorate a situation or a memory or a dream. Whereas in the project previous to this, where we did something more botanical, that would be something more in the documentation side of things. And they all look pretty, so that's what's important to me too. Filling in the shirt, I'm using some red. I could fill in a solid shirt, but I noticed I had these nice lines where I could fill them in and create a nice striped effect. And you'll come to places where you can experiment. You'll be at peace with them and take different risks. And I know that kind of sounds like Bob Ross, but I think that's a good mantra to have. Then again, I don't have hair, but I am very envious of people who have braids. So when I see Native American males with braids, I respect that because it's a nice tradition to keep. I just unfortunately, don't have hair. And then I'm taking a black pen and just reinforcing my line just to make him stand out a little bit better. And I'm moving pretty fast and I'm not exact on my original line. But then again, I'm happy and I'm having fun, so that's what's important there. And I don't really take too much time to erase, because if you notice when I started, and you can kind of see it now when I did the little line for the pocket, the left side is how I wanted it to look, but when I tried to match the right side, it didn't match, but I'm okay. I still have an interesting picture. Then again, we're going to do a little bit of green for grass just to give our person something to stand on. And this is where you can fill in an environment. Maybe you're at a powwow. Maybe you're on a hike. This is all open to you. Here we have an example of a family.